Howdy doody, my name is Cameron, better known as Venus Theory, and in this video I have the immense pleasure of introducing you to PSP InfiniStrip version 1.4. And unsurprisingly, like everything else PSP makes, I think it's great. I was there in the very early days of InfiniStrip. In fact, I was there at the NAMM show where it premiered the very first time, back when I was much younger and better looking. And I've even got the sweet little merch cup here to prove it. And, in fact, the remnants of what used to be a PSP InfiniStrip shirt. And just like this here shirt, ever since I got my greasy little mitts on InfiniStrip, I have used it to absolute death, and I'm very excited to show you what's new in this update. First up, we have Levelizer, a utility tool for transparent volume control, SnapForger, a transient-based dynamic processor, TiltEQ, which is a dual-mode tonal shaping module, Enhancer, which is a dual-mode frequency exciter, and BigBass, which is a low-end processing tool that makes the bass big. We'll also take a look at ReactiveEQ, which is a frequency-dependent dynamic control tool that was introduced in the 1.2 update. In case you're not already familiar with PSP InfiniStrip, a quick summary is that InfiniStrip is a channel strip plugin that's entirely configurable by you. Everything from the preamp to the EQ to the compressor to a variety of inserts can be put together in any order that you would like to create your own custom channel strip. And it all runs with zero latency. In this video, we're going to focus on what's new in this update, but if you want to learn more about InfiniStrip, you can check the playlist linked down in the description. If everything I just said sounds like I'm speaking some kind of alien language, it'll all make sense soon, because in this video, I wanted to walk you through a mix session where we're going to use all of the new modules of InfiniStrip and take a mix from this and turn it into this using only 3 plugins. It's good stuff, I'm excited, let's get into it. So here we are in the session, and I'll say right up front, I am not the world's most detailed mixer. I would consider myself very much a minimalist in the way I approach mixing, because I think of it like a puzzle. You know, we have these things that need to go together, and there's a certain number of problems we need to resolve to get it sounding better, so we just use tools to solve those problems and wash our hands of the situation. Anyways, let's start off by taking just a quick critical listen to the mix so far and see what we want to do with it. So far, I think that sounds okay. Let's skip ahead to the orchestral section here. Overall, I don't really think we're in a bad spot. It sounds all right, it just needs a couple tweaks in terms of the tone and balance. The stereo imaging needs a little bit of work. I wish the percussion was a little more present because it is such a percussion-heavy track. And I think it also needs just some air to it. It feels a little muffled overall, and I would like the bass to be a bit more beefy. But luckily, InfiniStrip is here to save the day, so let's dive into that. Step number 1 is the percussion. That would be all of these instruments. Overall, not too bad. I just wish it was a little more forward and had a bit more dimension to it. If we zone in on this layer here, I've pulled together 2 different things, 1 instance of ReactiveEQ and 1 instance of SnapForger. If I bypass these, I'm not really doing anything other than a little bit of filtering cleanup. It just had a little bit much low end, and we don't really need that because we have bass and other stuff, so I'm just getting that out of the way. ReactiveEQ here is going to focus in on a frequency, and there's just a little bit of kind of mushy something down in the low end around 80 hertz. So I'm using this to just duck that down, and it clears up a lot of space dynamically, where it feels a little bit better than just using an EQ to do that, because it's letting it breathe, but just getting it out of the way when it's a little too woofy. To me, that already sounds a lot better. And then I wanted a little bit more of that pluck to it. I really like this sort of textural and visceral quality to these instruments. So I'm using SnapForger here to bring up the attack just at pretty default settings. And just by increasing the attack a little bit, it's adding just a bit more of that transient information to really make that percussion pop. On this second instance here, I like the way that felt, it just needed a little more control to it. So I've used Levelizer, which just automatically rides the faders to balance everything out. So if we bring this in, it just smooths out the overall performance, I guess, and it sounds different than a compressor. If we get a compressor going to pretty similar levels, I feel like that doesn't breathe quite as much as this. I like that it's a little more aggressive on the transients, but really smooths out naturally as it decays into more of the tail of the sound. Now, on one of the main percussion lines, I'm doing a pretty similar move we did to the first one, just backwards, I guess. So first up, I'm gonna add in a filter. Just clearing up the low end, I really only want the bass to touch the low end. And then I'm using SnapForger backwards. Not only can it add transient information, but it can also remove it, which is incredibly useful. Then we have this sustain control, so I'm gonna bring up the tail of the sound while reducing the overall clickiness of it. And I think this adds a lovely kind of rich color to things like this, where you have that sort of initial hit and then more of a blooming tail after something. It's like a very unique compressor, I guess. That brings us to the last percussion section here, which I wanted to do some filtering to and then just brighten it up a little bit. So I've got basic filters running here. That's going into enhancer, which I'm using to enhance the high end, and then a master control just to add a little bit more stereo width to it. So this is just 3 very gentle moves, and I'll bring this in here. And it really brightens that up and just makes it feel more alive and kind of in the room. And it's interesting that you can filter things off the top end, but then bring it back with enhancer, and it adds just a different color to the top end, I think in a very pleasing way, especially when you're enhancing stereo information. On the shaker, I'm not really doing anything other than removing some low end, so that's taken our percussion section from something maybe a little bit flat feeling to something much more lively here. And I'm pretty happy with that, so let's move on to addressing some of the other problems in the mix. Moving on to this layer here, which I've called pad. It's just sort of a background thing, but I wanted a little bit more punch on those transients. So once again, all I've done is bring in SnapForger. Pretty gentle here, 35 on the attack, but I'm setting it to a fast mode, so it's really gonna snap those transients in. And because of this sound I've used, by increasing that attack, it almost sounds like a breath of someone, you know, playing a flute or something like that. So I think that adds a nice color to this sound that you don't really get normally. The next layer I wanted to button up is the lead sound here. Which I think is pretty good on its own. It has a lot of transient information. It just needed a little bit more balance to sit where I wanted it to in the mix. If we take a listen to it in context with the mix, it's this purple element here. You'll probably hear what I mean. It's like 90% of the way there. It just needs a little bit of oomph to, you know, push it through. So I've added a filter and the TiltEQ. So here I'm tilting this just to bring up a little bit of high end, and then using this contour control, which adds kind of a smiley face type curve. It just makes things feel more cool. You know, it just excites the fun frequencies without exaggerating them. So bringing this in, a little bit more bright, a little bit more present, and in context with the mix. It's bright, it's present, and it's not too in your face because it's got plenty of transient information already. It just sits a little bit better and more on top of things rather than buried kind of right alongside them. Moving into the guitars, there are 2 guitar parts here, these chords. And I think those are fine, they just need to be brought forward a bit more, and then this lead. Both of which feel fine. I think they just need brought up a little bit to feel a little bigger, and then the lead is just missing a little bit of leadiness to it, if that's even a word. With the chords here, I've added a filter and the old timer compressor. In case you missed it, old timer came to InfiniStrip, which rules. I love that compressor. Not really much else happening other than a saturator and just a pinch of stereo width on master control. So that brings the guitars out a little bit and makes them feel a little more big and epic. I'm not really sure why this is, but I find compressing something and then running it into the saturator just brings out a little more detail in a very pleasing way, and I like that you can really hear the attack on the guitars now, and the reverb tail just feels a little more substantial. Moving into the lead section, which is right here, if we give this a play right now with InfiniStrip bypassed, it's okay. I just think it needed a little bit of jazz hands on it, you know? So for this, I brought in the 70s preamp, added a bit of drive and a little bit of extra gain, some pretty gentle filtering, a touch of EQ, a saturator, and the new Levelizer, just to bring up those reverb tails a bit more and make this feel kind of leady-er, if that's another word I can use here. So let's bring that in and take a listen with the solo, which I think is nice. The saturation from the preamp and the saturator especially works to just make it feel a bit more bitey. And as we unsolo that and listen in the context of the mix, which I think is lovely. It's not too aggressive, but it feels more like a focal point and a lead element. By this point, the mix overall is feeling good. There's just a couple other balancing issues that I wanted to tweak. First up, I wanted the cymbal swells to feel a little bit more significant. To do this, just a couple very gentle tweaks, a filter just to get rid of some of that low range mud. Cymbals actually have a lot of low end information in them, so it's nice to just clean that up if you can. And then I've got the enhancer bringing up some top end here and the width set up a little bit more. And I've set the frequency on the high end enhancer down pretty far, so everything above that is going to start to be brought up, and combined with that stereo enhancement, beautiful, I think. If we skip ahead to this section here, I'm just going to bypass all of these and we can hear it before. And now let's turn these on and hear it after. It's a little subtle, as most of my mixing moves are, but I think it feels a bit wider, a bit more spacious, and just has a nice kind of super top-end sizzle to it that you don't normally get. On to the finishing touches. First up, this piano. I think it sounds fine, just needed a little bit of balancing, so I've cut out some low end and just removed a little bit of the mid-range, low mid-range here, just to add some room for the other instruments to sit in. And I've done some similar stuff to this keys layer. It's a very pretty sound on its own, but it was just fighting a little too much with other things in the mix. So here I've got the basic filters, another touch of EQ, and SnapForger just to bring up some of that tail information. I've actually placed this after the delay for this, so we're going to bring up that delay tail in a really pleasing way. Moves like this are really fun because I think you can do some pretty creative things in a mix that people sometimes forget about, like processing your delay and reverb sends and things like that. So with SnapForger, if I wanted to, I could even increase the attack and probably set it on fast mode to make the delay a little more pronounced even and really percussive and clicky. Which I think is really cool. It's just not right for this specific mix, but just a fun little trick to put in your mixing hat there. Moving on to this orchestral section here, it sounds all right. Again, just needs that little bit of razzle-dazzle. So in InfiniStrip, couple super basic moves, got my filter as always. I've brought up some of the low mids, which we've taken away from other things, again, just to clear space for this. And this is a really nice, around 400 hertz, just a very warm, kind of cozy blanket frequency for orchestral buses. Then I've got enhancer here bringing up everything above about 65K and master control for a pinch of stereo width, and it really just lifts the blanket off the orchestral section. In theory, I could be a little more aggressive with this, maybe by bringing up some top end with the channel Q as well. But in the context of the mix, I feel like that's just too much top-end information. I really just wanted some air on the orchestra, not necessarily a ton of top-end to it. Now we're getting into the home stretch. There's this section here, just another piano layer. Obviously a very processed ambient piano. So in this, just a couple quick moves, got my filter, didn't really do anything else other than add the SnapForger and Levelizer. So I wanted to bring up that attack and I wanted those delay pops to be a little more poppy. Levelizer, again, just leveling everything out, and I think it just breathes a little more nicely than a compressor. So adding that on top of it. So it really just brings out the percussive character of it, and putting the SnapForger before the Levelizer might seem like kind of a paradoxical choice given that this is bringing up the transient information and this is then leveling it back out, but it just adds a character more than I'm looking for transient enhancement exactly. So it's kind of bringing out a little bit of detail, but Levelizer is then making sure it doesn't get too obnoxious. You could have maybe used a limiter in place of this if you're doing something similar, but again, I think the Levelizer just has a more organic quality to the way it behaves, and that's probably a DSP thing I just don't understand, but that's the choice I made, and I'm sticking to it. Last but not least, let's talk about the bass, one of the coolest and most important things in music. So when this bass comes in this section, it's a nice, simple bass line, and in isolation, sounds nice. We get into some nice, big, low, rich notes. But in the context of the mix, especially as we hit that low note at the end there, I feel like that low note just doesn't quite feel substantial, and that's where big bass comes in. The aptly named big bass here is all about that bass, no treble. Good Meghan Trainor joke for you there. We have a few different controls. First up, we have upper, which dials in the main part of the bass. Then we have lower, which is subharmonics. And then we have synth bass, which adds all the bass harmonics. We also have an infra shelf here to rein things in a bit, as well as a master output control. And man, this thing just makes bass feel incredibly three-dimensional. So rolling back a little bit here, I'm going to bypass this and I'll just bring it in about halfway through. And like, you know, whew, that's all the fun frequencies that get you excited, isn't it? And especially in the context of the mix, now when those low notes come in towards the end here, just big, epic, gnarly low bass. And as a fun trick with this, another great idea you can do is the wet only button here. If we bring this in, you can hear only what big bass is adding. Which, listening to that is like making my whole room rattle. But I think that's a really cool way to add some ultra deep sub bass layers to something. And you could even think of this as a filter by just using only the wet output from big bass to add that ultra low, rumbly low end to whatever it is you're working on. Or if you wanted to then process that, I guess, super ultra subsonic information differently, that's a good way to output only the wet information. With all that out of the way, we've got the mix sitting in a good spot here. Let's give it a quick listen. I think all that's feeling really, really good. I just want to add one last layer of polish to it with two more plugins. First up, PSP Master Q2. This is an incredible mastering EQ. Very basic movements here, just shaving off some of the super ultra low stuff I don't need, as well as a little bit of extra high-end information that's just not really necessary, and scooping just a little bit of 500 hertz. That tends to be a sort of annoying frequency, and I find scooping a little bit of that or somewhere around that territory on the master bus just cleans things up a little bit. And finally, I'm sure you knew it was coming, Vintage Warmer 2. I think easily one of the best plugins of all time. It was my introduction to PSP. It was probably your introduction to PSP. And I think there are two kinds of people in life. People who like Vintage Warmer and people who are wrong. This isn't really doing too much, just a little bit of compression and a touch of high-end enhancement. I've also got this on the fat mode and multi-mode, which if you didn't know, it's actually multiband. If we click the logo down at the bottom, you can get in and dial in the multiband characteristics. In this case, I left it alone, but that's a really handy trick to know about if you need to just dial in the way that Vintage Warmer is coloring a mix. So putting all that together, taking a listen to that same section, we've now got this. And with that, I think we can wash our hands of mixing and say that's more than close enough for jazz. If you want to check out PSP InfiniStrip version 1.4 and everything that's new in it, or find more information, you can do so over at pspaudiowear.com. Thanks to the team at PSP for having me on the channel. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Maybe there's a few tricks in here to use in your next sessions. And with that, as always, I hope this inspires you to get out there and make something awesome.